There seems to be no end in sight for the Ukraine war as Vladimir Putin continues to order his forces to throw their bodies against Ukraine's defenses. Thousands of Russian soldiers are dying every month thanks to their president. And yet, Putin doesn't realize that he's simply forcing his country to descend deeper into a war that he's already lost. Russia failed to do what it set out to do, and thanks to Putin, the country has suffered a strategic defeat that has massive ramifications for Russia, both inside and outside of Ukraine. A NATO Admiral explains why Putin has already lost the war in Ukraine. That admiral is Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, who has served as the chair of NATO's military committee since January 2025. Speaking to the BBC on November 2nd, Dragone said, "From an operational point of view, the war between Russia and Ukraine has become so bogged down that it was almost time to sit and talk because it's a waste of lives." Putin's attritional strategy, which was supposed to wear Ukraine down over time so that Russia could take the entire country, has backfired. Instead, Russia finds itself mired in a quagmire of its own creation. The numbers show us that Dragone is right. When it comes to lost troops and equipment, Russia is bleeding itself dry to sustain Putin's supposed special military operation. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, over 1.14 million Russian troops have been killed, injured, or captured between the beginning of the invasion and November 4th. Russia doesn't fare any better on the equipment front. More than 11,300 tanks are destroyed, damaged, or otherwise rendered unusable by Russia. The same goes for around 34,250 of Russia's armored vehicles and over 66,500 of its cars and cisterns, the ministry says. On the aerial front, Russia is struggling both offensively and defensively. Around 1,200 of its anti-aircraft warfare units lie in tatters. 428 Russian planes and 346 of the country's helicopters have been destroyed, and Russia has also lost a staggering 77,860 unmanned aerial vehicles to Ukraine's defenses. This isn't just a war that's bogging Russia down in terms of losing military strength, it's a war that's costing Russia far too much money. We'll come back to that point in a moment. First, what we see in all of these figures is a Russian president who is losing control of the war that he started. That's according to the National Security Journal, which says that Putin's creation of deathnomics inside Russia has become a weakness for Ukraine to exploit. This term, which was coined by a Russian economist named Vladislav Inozemtsev, is used to describe a so-called artificial middle class that's being created inside Russia. That artificial class is using the Ukraine war to generate income that it would otherwise have never received. Mothers and wives sometimes encourage loved sons to sign up rather than fall into unemployment or alcoholism, as death payments and battlefield wages can enrich a family. Over time, many Russians become comfortable with the war's costs, the journal writes. However, the scale of Russia's losses now means that comfortable is no longer the word that anybody would use for those who enriched themselves thanks to Ukraine. Whatever pride that may have existed from sending a relative to war to earn more money than a family had ever seen is being replaced by fear. Too many are dying, and as Russia becomes ever more bogged down in Ukraine, as Dragone points out that it is, the country's military weakens to the point where Ukraine can also carry out aerial strikes inside Russian territory. Targeting oil refineries and energy infrastructure, Ukraine is making Russia feel the pain by causing fuel shortages and skyrocketing fuel prices, in addition to killing so many of Russia's men. But the cost of being so bogged down for Russia is far higher than even these numbers reveal. We touched on the economic burden to Russia earlier. In February, Russia Matters highlighted the financial cost of 3 years of war that Putin never anticipated. Sanctions have crippled Russia's economy, with around $340 billion in frozen reserves adding to the loss of $78.5 billion in losses for Russia's energy sector after 3 years of fighting. Over 460 companies have exited Russia as a result of the war, which has dealt another economic blow. And after inflated growth caused by Putin transforming Russia's economy into one that operates on a war footing, Russia's economic growth is on the decline. World Economic Outlook estimates growth to slow to 1.4% in 2025, followed by 1.2% in 2026, according to Russia Matters. It might be even worse than that. On October 30th, the Moscow Times reported that Russia has recorded its third straight quarter of economic growth slowdown. The first 9 months of 2025 have seen Russia's economy expand by just 1%, which is over 4 times slower than the same period in 2024. All of this is happening because of how bogged down Russia has become in Ukraine. This special military operation was never meant to be a multi-year war for Russia. For Putin, this invasion should have been easy work. Back in 2014, The Guardian reported that Putin had claimed that Russia could conquer all of Ukraine in just 2 weeks if it wanted to. Fast forward over a decade later, and 2 weeks have become almost 4 years and counting. As Dragone says, Russia will have to negotiate sooner or later. The only barrier to that is Putin himself. The seeming inability of Russia's leader to recognize the true cost of many of his strategic mistakes inside Ukraine means that Putin will resist negotiating for as long as he is able. At least that's the opinion shared by a US intelligence assessment upon which NBC News reported on October 28th. That analysis concluded that the agencies involved in creating it see no sign that Putin is prepared to compromise on any of the demands he had made for a peace deal in Ukraine. NBC also noted that a senior US official and a senior congressional official both feel that Putin is more dug in than ever. So are his military and Russia's economy. That's why the former is losing thousands of soldiers and pieces of equipment per month, while the latter is bleeding billions of dollars. Putin's strategic mistake in Ukraine appears to be a combination of stubbornness and an unwavering belief in the strength of a military that has proven itself to be anything but capable of achieving Putin's objectives. Russia's leader is bleeding his country dry of people and money to get what he wants in Ukraine. Even if Russia succeeds, the sheer cost wrought by Ukraine in a loss will be enough to make Russia weaker than it should be for years, perhaps even decades to come. That covers Putin's strategic mistakes inside Ukraine and their results. However, perhaps even more worrying for Russia is what Putin's invasion has led to outside of Ukraine. As a direct result of Putin's actions, NATO is stronger than ever. That's the exact opposite of what Putin wanted to achieve. As the Journal of Democracy noted back in April 2022, one of Putin's goals with the war was to prevent NATO expansion towards Russian territory. But as Dragone points out, all Putin has really achieved is a combination of failure in Ukraine and the very expansion that he wanted to resist. Both Sweden and Finland have joined NATO as a direct response to Russia's actions in Ukraine, which in itself is a sign that Putin made a severe strategic mistake. According to USNI News, the addition of Sweden to NATO is a particular problem for Russia. With Sweden, NATO is now able to create much stronger defenses in the Nordic region of the Baltic Sea. The outlet notes that Sweden delivers over 100 years of experience in operating submarines in that very sea, which will allow NATO to patrol the doorway to Russia's massive St. Petersburg port. The addition of Sweden and Finland also allows NATO planners to finally cover what NATO planners once referred to as a white space in that waterway. What was once somewhat neutral territory close to Russia's borders has become a space that NATO defenses can fill. USNI News also quoted RAND's Marta Kepper, who told the outlet Sweden's most important contribution to NATO will be its territory for deterrence and defense purposes. Sweden can have an important role as an enabler and as a basing and staging area for US and allied forces. Sweden can help NATO prevent Russia's ability to shape the regional environment for a potential conflict and repel a Russian invasion. The Baltic Sea isn't quite a NATO lake, despite what some might claim, USNI News adds. It's a 145,000 square mile stretch of water, and NATO can't patrol it all. But the addition of 2 countries to NATO that maintain presences in the Baltic Sea and can allow NATO to reinforce its collective presence is bad news for Putin. And it only happened because of the Ukraine invasion. The addition of 2 new countries is far from the only way that NATO has strengthened. As the BBC reports, June saw all NATO members agree to increase their defense spending to 5% of their gross domestic products, or GDPs, by 2035. That move came amidst pressure from US President Donald Trump, who had previously suggested that NATO's non-US members needed to do more to pay their way in the alliance. Still, it was another outcome of the strategic mistakes Putin has made when it comes to NATO. The Ukraine war was supposed to weaken NATO's hold over Europe. Instead, it strengthened that hold. Putin pushed NATO into a corner, and it's come out swinging with new members, higher spending, more support for Ukraine, and as RBC Ukraine reported on November 3rd, a new plan to reinforce NATO's eastern flank with drones. By mid-2026, the outlet reports, NATO will essentially have a drone wall on its eastern flank to counter Russia's own drone threat. Again, we see NATO getting stronger in ways that it would never have needed to if Putin had just kept his country out of Ukraine. Still, Putin might think winning in Ukraine would solve these problems. NATO's expansion could be counteracted by Russian expansion, and with control over Ukraine, Putin might think that he could negotiate for sanctions to be dropped, enabling Russia's financial recovery. Sure, over 1 million and counting casualties isn't great for Russia in the future, but Putin might think that the millions of Ukrainians essentially added to Russia if he wins will take care of that problem. If that's what Putin believes, he's wrong, on so many levels. For one, Dragone tells the BBC, even a Russian victory in Ukraine won't mean that Putin gets to control the country. They will not get a friendly or puppet government like in Belarus. Putin will not succeed, Dragone claims. Perhaps that's what Putin doesn't understand. Though he has often framed his special military operation as a way to liberate the people of Ukraine from a supposedly tyrannical government, the reality is that most in Ukraine don't want Putin or any Russian puppets in their midst. We saw proof of that back in August. That's when the Kyiv Independent reported on a poll that quizzed Ukrainians on whether or not they would accept any of the proposed peace deals that existed at the time. Those deals included restrictions on Ukraine joining NATO, in addition to handing over control of 4 partially occupied regions of the country to Russia. Ukraine said no in massive numbers. A little over 3/4 of those polls said that they would reject such a peace deal. That's a slight decline from the 82% who said the same back in May, but it still shows that Ukraine has no appetite for any sort of Russian influence on the country's actions. As Dragone points out, this rejection of Russia's proposals shows that Ukraine will continue to fight tooth and nail to reject Russia, even if Putin's special military operation succeeds in taking all of Ukraine's territory. Putin won't have a nation that he can control. He won't get a population that is willing to boost Russia's flagging economy. The odds are that he will preside over a country filled with subterfuge, sabotage, and underground resistance long after a Russian victory in Ukraine. Yet another strategic mistake, then. Putin's belief that Ukraine wants Russian control is outright rejected by Ukraine itself. And this Ukrainian rejection will be supported by NATO and its European members, Dragone adds. The European nations that are supporting Ukraine's defense right now are prepared to keep going, Dragone tells the BBC. He adds that everything Putin has done in Ukraine has served as a wake-up call for Europe, that it cannot take Russia lightly. Instead, NATO has to strengthen, as it has done, and it needs to take a more aggressive tone when dealing with Russia's threats. That tone extends to the suggestions that Russia might use the nuclear option against Ukraine or NATO. On October 31st, the BBC reported that Russia has unveiled a pair of new nuclear weapons with which it hopes to threaten anybody who opposes it. One of those weapons, which was first discussed in 2018, is dubbed the Poseidon. This weapon can travel at speeds of up to 120 miles per hour while traveling in a constantly changing route that Russia claims makes it impossible to intercept. How true that can be for a weapon traveling at the speed of a drone in an era where supersonic and hypersonic nuclear missiles are preferred remains to be seen. Russia has also unveiled a nuclear-powered cruise missile named the Burevestnik. That weapon supposedly has an unlimited range, though again, it's never clear how much of the information that Russia provides about its weapons is accurate. Putin flaunts and threatens these nuclear weapons. But Dragone says that's another strategic mistake, because NATO can match Russia's nuclear arsenal. We are not threatened by them, he tells the BBC when discussing Russia's nuclear weapons. We are just ready to defend our 32 nations and our 1 billion people. We are a nuclear alliance. Dragone isn't wrong. The presence of the US in NATO means that the alliance has access to 5,044 nuclear weapons, per the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN. Russia has a few more than the US, with around 5,500, ICAN adds. However, the small shortfall is covered by 2 other NATO members, France and the UK. The Arms Control Association says that these 2 nations combined have 515 nuclear weapons. And thanks to its massive infrastructure, NATO is capable of launching these nukes from land, sea, or air. It would take far fewer than these massive collections of nukes to destroy all of the countries that might get involved in a conflict between Russia and NATO. But that's the point. Mutually assured destruction has always worked that way. Putin's strategic mistake here is believing that he can make credible nuclear threats against NATO when he knows that the alliance would devastate Russia just as badly as Russia hurts NATO's members. Threats that might have worked in the past only seem to be reinforcing the stronger responses that Russia is receiving from NATO due to the war. Putin unveils new nuclear weapons. Dragone points out that NATO is a nuclear alliance. Putin, so long used to being appeased when he throws Russia's nuclear weight around, is now being told flat out that NATO has what Russia has. There is no de-escalation here. Putin's bluff is being called, and Russia's president has no real response to that fact other than more useless saber-rattling. This is why Russia has lost the Ukraine war, whether it knows it or not. Yes, it's still possible that Russia could take all of Ukraine's territory. If it does, it will take many more years before that happens. In October, Reuters reported that Russia advancing at its current rate means it will have occupied 1% of Ukraine's total landmass between January and December 2025. That adds to the 19% it already occupied to give Putin 20% in just under 4 years. There's another 80% to go, and a rate of 1% of Ukraine per year means Putin would be long gone well before he realizes his goal of total control over Ukraine. That alone is a loss, though Russia might still keep pushing even when Putin is no longer president. If it does, it faces all of the problems we've highlighted already. Russia's economy is struggling. It's losing people at a rate of tens of thousands per month thanks to Putin's strategic incompetence. And looking through a wider lens shows us that Putin's desire to weaken NATO by limiting its expansion has gone unrealized. NATO has new members, and it's pumping more money into preparing for whatever Russia might have planned after Ukraine than ever before. And all of this is without mentioning that even a version of Ukraine that's ostensibly controlled by Russia will still never be Russian. Too many Ukrainians oppose the very concept of Russian rule for that to happen. Even if Putin wins in Ukraine, he still loses. Whatever brief moment of celebration he would enjoy after a victory will be swallowed up by the weakened state of Russia created by Putin's strategic blunder. And all of this is before China enters the picture. So long depicted as an ally of Russia, China has been playing the long game that enables it to strengthen itself at Russia's expense. Putin is now so heavily reliant on China that he is engaging in the ultimate irony, giving up Russian land to China so that Russia can continue its expansion into Ukraine. Russia's Far East is falling into China and North Korea's hands, and there's nothing that Putin can do to stop it. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of how Putin's mistakes are costing Russia far more than he ever believed they could. And thank you as always for watching.